So
Yes, so we are at the top of the hour.
yeah, I'll introduce you, the two of you actually. So welcome to workshop 4, negotiating education agreements and First Nations reading successes. We have Arthur Lin and John Barry. John has been involved in education technology for over 22 years. And he started his career as a high school teacher in Torrance High School. And this is where Beverly Hills 9210 was filmed. So you might see the Arthur's picture on the wall there, where he was a very accomplished athlete and scholar at the time. And then also we've got John Barry, Senior. He's the educational partnership consultant, and he's recently retired from 41 years of teaching and administration in special education, and most recently as a principal at Amethyst Demonstration School and Roberts School for the Deaf in London, Ontario. I won't go, they've got long 1 hour bios, so I won't go into that, but I'll just turn it over to them.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you so much, Simon. And yeah, my bio and list of accomplishments is much shorter than John's. We could go on for quite a while with John and all of his experiences, but we'll cut it short and get into the topic of our discussion, which is reading success in First Nations. And we're so excited to tell you this story about the work that we've been doing. The bulk of it will be John and his interview with Catherine Rutherford, which you'll see in just a moment. Unfortunately, Catherine couldn't be here with us, but she did agree to a pre-recorded interview. So that should be real interesting. But before we dive into all of that, I just wanted to provide a little bit of a background and a framework for understanding kind of what we're doing here and the program that we're using. If you were in our earlier session, you know that Greenfield Learning, we are an educational consulting firm, and we work with lots of different programs and things to help increase success amongst students throughout Canada, First Nations and otherwise. And we work with schools and districts all throughout the nation. I don't know why it's not forwarding. Well, let me try that again.
John, sometimes on Zoom there's a lag that you don't see.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, I'm going to try this again. There we go. So don't know where I left off, but our focus for this afternoon, for part of this session, will be on the Lexia program and how we're utilizing Lexia within First Nations schools and communities and schools throughout Canada to help increase reading achievement. And as a brief kind of introduction to what Lexia is all about, it is a blended learning program that supports literacy acceleration for all students. So it is a technology-based program that still has the educator at the center of instruction. And so students will be working independently on computers or laptops or iPads or a variety of devices they could use with this program to get student-centered instruction in all of the foundational areas of reading. But it utilizes what is called a blended learning approach to instruction. So the teacher is still at the center of the educational process. And as I mentioned earlier, we work with schools and districts throughout Canada. Right now, we're in over 3,000 schools, working with close to 8,000 educators and impacting the lives of over 100,000 students. And we'll share some of the data with you and some of the achievements that we've been seeing, but it's been phenomenal. And this is primarily working just with the Lexia program. We offer some other programs as well, which would, increase this number even more. But most of what you're seeing there are schools and districts that are utilizing Lexia. When we talk about Lexia, we're really talking about a couple of different programs. There's the Lexia Core 5 program, which is designed to enhance instruction for students in kindergarten through 5th grade and provide them with all of the foundational skills that they need to become effective readers. There is also the Lexia Power Up Literacy program, which is designed for 6th graders and above who are not yet reading at grade level. So Power Up Literacy is more of an intervention program. And the great thing about that is if you have a 6th, 7th, 8th grader who is maybe reading at the 2nd or 3rd grade level, the Power Up program provides them with the instruction that they need, but in a way that's age appropriate for older students. So they're not going to be seeing a bunch of ducks and bunnies and things like that as they go through the Power Up program. Underlying both of those programs is a very robust management system that's called MyLexia. And from within MyLexia, educators can get data on exactly where their students are at, how they've progressed, how much time they've spent. But besides all of that, it provides actionable data that the educator can use to target instruction and additional interventions where needed. So it's actually very proactive. It will detect when a student is struggling with the online program and then provide educators with lesson plans and worksheets and all kinds of resources that they can utilize offline to help those students with whatever they're struggling with. So that whole thing is called a blended learning model, which I'll get into in just a moment. This is a research-based and research-proven program. I mentioned that it was based on the science of reading, which is an approach that is founded on over 50 years of research into what makes effective reading instruction for students in schools. And it's been shown that when you utilize this approach, 95% of your students can learn how to read and read effectively. It's sometimes called the science of reading. It's sometimes called structured literacy, but that's what the programs are based on, Lexia Core 5 and Lexia Power Up Literacy. It's also a research-proven program. There have been numerous peer-reviewed published research studies that have shown that this is an effective program to use in schools as either an intervention or as a supplemental resource for mainstream instruction. The nice thing about having a technology-based program like this is it lends itself to easy differentiation. So regardless of what level your students are working at, this program will automatically differentiate instruction for each student and provide, as they're going through the program, provide them with scaffolded supports, instructional branching, et cetera, et cetera. As I mentioned, the gains that we have been seeing from this program have been remarkable. Over on the left, this was data that was compiled for the 2020-2021 school year. And on the left, what it's showing is that 26% of students at the start of the school year were working at grade level or above grade level. That more than doubled to 61% by the end of the school year. On the right, what it's showing is that students that started 2 or more grade levels behind, 25% of them ended the year on grade level or reached their grade level benchmark. 41% of those students gained 2 or more grade levels in 1 year. by utilizing the program. And those are remarkable, considering that these are students that started 2 or more grade levels behind. Some of them might have been as far behind as 4 grade levels or 5. This is a very quick overview of what the program is like and how it works.
Lexia Core 5 Reading helps students of all abilities in grades pre-K through 5 become successful readers and confident learners. In Core 5, students develop both foundational and advanced literacy skills, so they have the skills and knowledge they need to make the critical shift from learning to read to reading to learn. Our 3-part adaptive blended learning model is powered by connecting artificial intelligence with human intelligence through data that keeps students motivated and engaged as they work independently through their personalized learning paths in the online student program, provides teachers and school leaders with real-time student data to make informed decisions, all without stopping to administer a test, and connects that student data to drive the teacher-led classroom instruction. In schools and districts that use Core 5, students receive the exact reading instruction they need when they need it. Teachers can easily differentiate instruction for each student using meaningful data. And school and district leadership can see a full picture of academic progress across a district, school, grade, and class down to the individual student. And to strengthen the school-to-home connection, families can reinforce learning by practicing new skills and using Core 5 at home. Every student deserves the opportunity to become a successful reader and confident learner. Let's see how Core 5 can make an impact on student achievement and teacher effectiveness in your school.
That's a very brief overview. As I mentioned, this is all based on the science of reading. I talked about this already. Basically, what that means is that students get a very rigorous, systematic, pedagogically sound introduction to phonological awareness. They're taught phonics explicitly. They get into the structure of words, things like prefixes and suffixes and the role they play. They get practice with automaticity and fluency. They get to expand their vocabulary, especially when it comes to academic terms and words. And all the while, they're working on comprehension skills as well. So we're really having them make that shift from very early on, from reading to learn to learning to read, from learning to read to reading to learn. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John, who will introduce you and give you a little bit more detail on what the adaptive blended learning model looks like.
You bet. Thank you, Arthur. And that is the adapted blended learning model. That's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
You all know that blended learning is when we involve a computer. Some people think it's just a computer and a classroom. No, it has to do with several other steps, all of which you see there in that central diagram. You've got the student who's working away on the computer, absolutely. And there's a uniqueness about that with Lexia, that it is self-paced, as Arthur said. The child's placed exactly where they begin. You're going to see a slide about that in just a minute. The data continues to build, so that what you've got is students motivated by their own successes. We've made a real effort to make sure that the child is motivated within the program. I have a couple of granddaughters who absolutely love going on Lexia because it's so reinforcing on a personalized basis. Performance data is easy to access for the teacher, the administrators, and also easy to interpret. Program resources support face-to-face instruction and independent student practice. So that's the offline. If the child needs a little extra help, there are offline resources that are immediately sent to the teacher. And those, by the way, are also available to every other student in the school, regardless of whether they're using Lexia. So we're very big on the personalized aspect of the learning. So it's targeted, it's time efficient. Some students are going on for as little as 15 to 20 minutes, depending on their age and where they are and so on. And again, as Arthur said repeatedly, there's the teacher right in the center there. I'm guessing that's probably the teacher on the right-hand side. She looks a little stern today, so it might be the principal. I don't know. Anyway, everything is based on performance, and it's all research validated and proven. This is what we call our reading instruction model. So this is how we do it. And those of you in the group who are teachers are going to recognize some of the concept. The first slide, the first picture you see on the top, those are our tier 1, tier 2 students, and many of our tier 3, as a matter of fact. So they're going through these slides on an individual basis within our Lexia program. Core 5 is what this is. You see that first slide's a little bit busy. We've got 3 words. We've got several icons there. That's looking at a specific task that the child is, as you know, we just don't throw that at them. They've warmed up to that. And if they demonstrate mastery, they go right at the end of the unit to what we call Lexia Skill Builders. So that's where we've gone. Whoops, just one second, Arthur, here. He's rushing me here. That basically, they demonstrate mastery and so on, and they would go through the whole unit. When they complete that unit online, now we can change the slide. We have an activity, which we call it in Ontario, we talk about, what is it? Once you complete the task, you want to make sure you've got it really solidly. Excuse me. So these are called skill builders. They are available at the end of the unit. The teacher distributes them, marks them, but doesn't sit with the child. So this is done completely by the child on their own. You can see we've taken the same information. Now we're just looking at, this happens to be a fluency reading in looks like a grade 1 to me, and the child will work on that. And it's a culminating activity. That's the word I was looking for a moment ago. And you can see we've looked at some of the same information on there. And now we're just going to use a pencil and paper to make sure we've got that solidly. Going back to that adaptive model, what about if the child who doesn't get that first slide, they don't demonstrate mastery, they don't know what icon should be pulled down? Should the bat go in the first, or the, not sure? Well, let's give them a little bit of support. We call that scaffolded support. It's in our guided practice section right there. And if they get it, you see the little arrow right back up to mastery, and then they complete it. But what about the child? And of course, we have many. I've dealt with many over the years. My little granddaughter has needed to go to what's called our directed instructions. That's a little more intensified support. We've simplified the task in guided practice. You see there, now instead of trying to pick from 6, we only pick from 3 in guided. Now we're only picking 1. It's yes or no. Some children are going to continue to struggle. And by the way, in our direct instruction, we've actually had the teacher. We have a voice, a teacher voice. It's not a computerized voice. It's very pleasant. My kids back at my other school used to call it Mrs. Lexia. I don't know if there is one of them, but she comes on and she does her very best to explain in very understandable, slow terms what, in fact, we are required to do. If we get it, boom, we go right back up to guided practice, and then we go up to demo mastery, and we're off and running. Well, let's say we still don't get it. And this is the brilliance of Lexia that makes teachers' lives, parents' lives, and kids' lives so much easier. Now the teacher's been informed. There's been 2 struggles with this last slide. Teacher's now been informed we need to do a little bit of work. This is where Arthur said earlier, the teacher is the center. Teacher is going to deliver that lesson to the child. Let's take a quick look at what a lesson looks like. These are some of the best written lessons. Again, part of my time as an instructor here at Western in the Faculty of Education, I'm big on lesson planning and so on. And quite frankly, I've had to work hard with some of my students to get them there. These are, in my view, some of the best lessons I have ever seen. Anybody with a teaching background can look at these. They've got all of the steps, the guided practice, the implementation, the application that the child needs to do. See the little icons. There's what the teacher says. There's what we want the child to say. We got the wrap up, some extra tips that are wonderful. And we've got, the things that can go on. Even if they don't get it with the first attempt, I had a situation once with a child that they couldn't get the difference between a hard or long and a short vowel. And they suggested in one of the little tips, put an elastic. Some of you are saying, well, everybody knows that, John. I didn't. I was a secondary teacher. I didn't know. I hadn't seen this elastic trick, but basically, as you say, you keep your fingers out. As you go the short vowel, you move it back and forth. I swear to goodness, after 2 times with the elastic, this child got it. Happened to be my own child, which made it even more wonderful. So there's our Lexia lessons. By the way, as I said earlier, all of those lessons are available to all of your students, regardless of whether they're directly on Lexia or not. So there's our overall model. So no child, to use something we've all heard, no child is left behind in this. It works very well with our Tier 1 students, our students who don't need much help. They just go through and go to their skill builders. Our struggling students need a little guided practice. And then, of course, we have students who need even more direct instruction. And we've got the Lexia lessons, which the teacher marks and goes over with the child, works with the child. So one-on-one, the skill builders are marked and returned. The Lexia lessons are marked. That little red apple in the corner, that's what tells the teacher as they're doing what we call a shoulder check as you're walking through the students in your classroom. That red light's on in the corner of their slide right there. Any of those slides could have that red, the 3rd slide would have that red indicating to the teacher that you might want to just slow down as you go by that child. How are they doing? You might want to encourage them. If they've done it twice, move on. We're going to get a lesson on that later. You can continue in the program. We'll talk about that one tonight or this afternoon or whatever time the teacher's designated for the Lexia lessons. This is all gathered again. Sorry, all of a sudden I have something showing up on my screen that is not what I want. Where did that come from? Hang on one second here. Apologies. Okay, all of this as part of a blended learning model is aggregating sort of behind the scenes. This is an example of the typical dashboard that a teacher sees. This one looks to me like a whole class. We've got a number of things going on. We can see how many students are involved in the program sort of at any given moment. We can make sure that kids are getting the right amount of time on their computers and so on. And this is, we have data for the individual teacher to check on their individual child. Here's a little better shot of that. Up top is overall progress of the class. Then as we go individually, those are individual students. You can see that top student, for example, the lighter blue, that's where the student entered the program. They had an auto assessment, an assessment of their reading skills without taking them out of class. It was all done automatically, 5-10 minutes on the computer, and we know exactly where they need to be. And then you can see the darker dots beyond that. That's how they were progressing within the program. It also predicts how the child will do by the end of the year. So just imagine that again, as a principal responsible for getting kids to a certain reading level, I knew exactly who was at higher risk. I could add additional time for them. I could do various things to support them. We also realize who's at risk, which students are particularly at risk for failure, and how are we going to mitigate that as best we can. Conversations with parents. This is invaluable information to share with parents. Diplomatically, in some cases, of course. It's very granular. It's daily, weekly, monthly. We can literally go into this program and see what the child did this morning. Are they good with, were they good with this lesson? Where did they struggle? And so on. So also great insights for teachers and the administrators overall. We're dealing with a local board nearby here, and they were very excited to be able to monitor, overview things at a higher level to know this school needs a little more of that, this school needs a little less, and so on. So great. Next. Again, what's really critical about this, again, as an instructor at a faculty of education, giving teachers less time to worry about organization, more time to actually get into things. This is what the teacher sees. Up top there, the first of that green box, we see immediately who needs usage. Anybody with that little yellow icon, as I go down, you can see them on the right there. They need more usage. That means they're just not using the program. As my dentist rather annoyedly said to me, John, if you don't show up, I can't fix your teeth. I say to my students, we would say to Mikey there, Mikey, it's not Mo, actually, yes, Mikey, you've only done 22 minutes. You need whatever it is, 60. So if you don't go on, it's not going to help you. And this is a really important part of it. It's easily monitored. You see that first thing. I have lots of teachers, first thing in the morning, that's what they check, because obviously you want to get kids on. The next beside that is who needs instruction. So again, I talked about the lessons. You saw the lessons a few moments ago. That's where these teachers, there's a little icon. See those icons are he's very good at this, by the way. We need to deliver a lesson to Bridget LeMay. And literally, if you click on that, up is going to pop, not any lesson, the exact lesson that Bridget needs at this point in time. Think of the power of that. Again, as a struggling teacher back a few years ago, I had lots of situations with deaf children, as a matter of fact, where I knew what they needed, but did I know where to find how to teach short A and long A? No. So this is a brilliant way. Teachers love this, and so on. Here's my favorite part again is now as a principal, but the certificates. That is a wonderful little, very pointed certificate that children get when they complete a unit. So you can see over there are units being accumulated. Well, this is wonderful because at the end of the week, we will get a certificate, at the end of a series of lessons, a unit, we call it. It's all calculated and it's all factored in, and we get a lovely certificate, which I don't think we can show you, but we will certainly show it to you. And it honors the success the child has, tells mom and dad, here's some things you can work on. They're very popular. I'll tell you how popular they are. I was running a school with 7, 8, 9, and 10. my could give certificates out on a Friday at our regular meeting. Our students were traveled at home, and I would give these out on Friday, but I didn't give them to the 9 and 10s. I thought, gee, they're too cool for school. I had a contingent of grade 9 and 10 boys show up at my office on a Friday morning before the lesson, and they said, Mr. Barry, we'd like to know why don't you give our certificates out on Friday? And I immediately said, my mistake, you'll have them today. What they told me, and I didn't get caught up in it, but what they told me is that they wanted to learn to read. They didn't care that they were working way below their grade levels. They were very proud to receive those certificates. I'm like, I get it. I was thrilled. So next one, Arthur. So wrapping things up, this is designed for your student and your educator success. You've got an adaptive blended learning technology. It makes teachers' lives simple, minimal assessment burden. You're not taking kids out of class to give them assessment. It's constantly building up. It's for all learners, tier 1, tier 2, even though it started with a dad for his very needy LD child rather, it's now been, it's moved in Ontario throughout tier 1, tier 2. Why would we wait till kids are struggling? Give them the help they can use to benefit them. Heartbreaking for me, running a school for kids who could not learn to read. They're in grade 7 and grade 8 and they're not reading. And I now have 2 years, and we were highly successful using Lexia. But if we could have avoided that and had those kids not go through the frustration and move away from home, it's research proven, not research. It's obviously research based. It's proven. We've got some of the highest levels of ESSA approval of the highest, and we're very proud of that. And I think that's it for me. Arthur, over to you. Oh, did I freeze on everybody? Apologies.
And as we mentioned earlier, we're very pleased to present Catherine Rutherford, who has been working with John to implement the Lexia program in the Cree Nation. And she unfortunately could not be with us, but she did agree to an interview to be pre-recorded. And so this is John and Catherine.
Catherine, welcome and thank you for doing this. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, what school system you're involved with, and so on?
So welcome and good morning, everyone. Yes, I have the good fortune to work for the Cree School Board in James Bay in northern Quebec. I have lived in Iuishji on and off since 1988. And I am currently in the role of the Director of Complementary Education Services, which encompasses special education, response to intervention, early prevention, and land-based education.
Wonderful, thank you. Can we most urgent needs? So question number 2 on your list. How would you respond to that? What was your most urgent need, read literacy? So,
as all of us have experienced due to the pandemic and due to school closures, as well as the very fast shift to online learning, which was a challenge to some extent for us at the Cree School Board and Iuishji. Really, it's addressing the unfinished learning that occurred due to that. And also, even prior to that, our response to intervention model and our department was really focused on closing reading gaps. So we're working diligently to identify and determine what are the essential targets each child needs to know to be successful at that grade level, and how can we best support them by providing them additional time and strategies to attain those targets.
Well, that's excellent. I heard all of that, so we were off to a good start. Had you tried any other programs prior to Lexia? Do you want me to repeat that? Had you tried any other programs prior to Lexia?
Did we try other programs? Yes. Well, we have been using very successfully I think you're aware of it as well, for our tier 3 model, sorry, and that's more of our intensive model. We have been using Empower Reading, which came from the Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto, working with, at the time, it was their Learning Disabilities Department. We've had great success with that. And because the model is that it is direct instruction from a teacher with a maximum group size of 8, we also wanted to have something for our students who had maybe a little less intensive need, and for our tier 2. So this is why we were very interested in Lexia, because it provided with us an opportunity to have both the blended model of indirect explicit instruction, as well as being the student be able to follow their own learning path using the Lexia software.
That's great. Thank you for that, Catherine. That's very fascinating, because that is exactly the Ontario model. The demonstration schools model is the combination of Empower and Lexia, and many people in the province are moving Lexia into tier 2 and in fact into tier 1. So that's you're well ahead of the trend, kind of thing. So the next question is, how did you hear about Lexia, and what interested you in it?
We had, I'd heard about it from different sources, but actually one of our schools had started to use Lexia about 2 years ago. So we were very fortunate to have, they were kind of a pilot for us, and they had great success. And so we had decided after, talking to the director of the school there and their teachers, that this would be an ideal program for us to implement across the board.
Yes, and I know exactly the school you're talking about, and they were just wonderful to work with. So any particular factors that led you to the choice of Lexia in the end?
The research that we were looking because as I mentioned earlier, we are implementing a response to intervention framework at the Cree School Board that we have really adapted to meet the needs of our specific, our students. And for our tier 2, we were looking for something, again, that had a strong research base behind it, and also something that could be easily accessible to teachers. So we thought this way, that if there was a turnover in teacher, if it's a substitute teacher, the resource is available to the student. Also, given that we don't know what's happening in the future, if we had to shift back to online, we'd be able to make this available to the students. And one of the factors that we really appreciated about it is the blended model, so that if a student needed additional help, or even if the teacher chose to teach, a certain strategy, they have the support with the explicit lessons they can then print out and use.
That's excellent. Thank you for that, Catherine. And I love how you're so well aware of the various terminology. You've obviously been involved with this for a while, and that actually relates to our my next question, which is the purchasing process. So you made the decision, you get a hold of these people at Greenfield Learning. How was that experience for you? The purchasing part of it.
I think we reached it. We were looking and researching Lexia since about 2020. So we've had quite a bit of communication with the Greenfield representatives. There's been good support, very fast turnaround from all of you, and I guess patience on both parts from us as we move forward to get approvals, as you also worked, looking at the best packages that you could offer us. So it's been a good experience for us.
Well, I'm relieved to hear that, and I do recall having chats with you. I was with my family at Disneyland, and we were working hard, and you were so gracious to talk to me during your vacation as well. So I'm very glad to hear that. And that leads me to the next question, which is, were there any barriers to the implementation? Obviously, people may know that, once you buy it, we have several meetings with our implementation team, and they begin to develop the implementation plan with you. And one sec here.
I guess.
Sorry, go ahead. Barriers to implementation? Were there any?
I can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm just asking what the implementation process was like. You've got quite a few schools, diverse locations. They're all over the area. And how is the implementation, getting people up and running with Lexia? I know it's early days. It's only October, and we've been really only at this a couple of months with the actual program. But what are your thoughts on the implementation process?
So some of our implementation process for us is we're fortunate enough to, as I said, we have this response to intervention department. We have consultants working directly with the schools. And so we did an initial training, and then we've been doing continual support with the schools moving forward. Of course, it's just ensuring that, we have enough devices for all of the students, including headsets. So those are, something that I think we're almost covered in that area. Like anything that's starting new, it's just getting people to buy in and moving forward. Because we have this framework set in place, that we have established in our literacy blocks, that we have a 15-minute intervention period across all literacy blocks at the elementary level in all schools. So as far as having the time, it's already been implemented into the schedule. So the teachers then either we're doing something that we call MAMU groups, where students are being, potted together if they're working on a certain strategy or at a certain level, and then they're offering. So we came up with a model whereby the student would be either on, a device working on Lexia for 20 minutes, and then they would have some explicit instruction. So we're creating a framework for it to be supported using the model that we're already doing. So it's getting there bit by bit, but as you said, we only started in August. So I think we'll have a better sense, in the new year. And as we know, as when we're rolling out something new, I think it really takes a good year to have a sense of how things are.
So because of time, I'm going to pause that right there and just kind of wrap up. So,
well,
Arthur, can I just mention to the group that Catherine is willing to speak with you. She just asks if you wouldn't mind contact us, and I will give you. I don't want to put her email and everything online here, but she's very happy to talk to people. So if you would like to speak more directly with Catherine, by all means, ask Arthur. I will get you in touch with her.
So at this point, we've done a lot of talking at you. Would love to open it up if anybody has any questions about how the program works, how it's being implemented, the types of results that we're seeing. Please feel free.
Not all at once. It's a lot, we know.
John, is that the teacher speaking? Yeah.
And the principal, yeah.
Yeah.
But I swear to Arthur I was going to go slow, and it's just not in my makeup. I apologize. But we really want to thank Catherine. She was wonderful. She was running between meetings, and yeah, we're going to try and do something again. She's got so much wonderful information. We have other First Nations school systems using the program, all of whom said they could do it. We just couldn't get the timing exactly right. So
And tell us, John, how many students are using the program at Cree Nation?
Oh, you would fit me on that. I would say Catherine's situation is it's around, don't quote me, but I think it's well over 2,000. So 2,500. I know again, locally here, we have another First Nations. And again, what typically happens, Catherine alluded to this, but we get a school or two, and particularly during the pandemic, a First Nation school, a teacher hears about it from their sister or their somebody, whatever, and one of the regular school boards, they reach out to us. We absolutely, Arthur and I both have very big soft spots for First Nations. I worked very closely with one for some years and kind of feel I understand it better than I certainly did. So whatever we can do to First Nations schools, we're going to do it. So we get them going. And then of course they tell their colleagues, again, it was the pandemic, so that was kind of hard to do. But of course, the remote aspect was very attractive to people. So in almost all of the situations where we had a school or two within a First Nations system, and there are quite a few, the senior leadership would reach out to us, or somebody would introduce us. And then, so now we've got, I don't know, 4 or 5 systems throughout Ontario and Quebec.
Including Six Nations?
Including Six Nations, yes. Cree being the biggest. And again, I just didn't realize that I obviously assumed it, but I didn't know quite to the extent until this morning, but how much research they had done. And that makes Arthur and I very proud. We are very proud of this program because of the success it has with kids. And to me, and again, I listened very carefully this morning, and I want to get his name right, but listening to what he was saying, thinking, absolutely, First language is the most critical. When I saw that, and I met some of the wonderful people who teach it in Fort Albany, and I have such respect for them. But the mother of the chief actually at the time came for dinner. She had 11 children. One was chief, one was the head of education. And she said to me in literally tearing up that, yes, they need to learn their first language, but they also need English to be successful. And she had a certain sadness that she never learned English that way. So, but her children have, and they are, again, one's the chief, they've all had wonderful jobs. Some of the daughters also had some very good responsibilities within the community, and some of them had left to go outside. So I agree with that, absolutely first language. And there's also a lot of research that says if your first language is strong, you will adapt the second language very quickly. We recognize that very much, which is why our Lexia English program, which we didn't even talk about, is really doing well, because if you've already got a solid first language base, your ability to develop a second language. So we are all in favor of, let's get our first languages in the home, let's get our children speaking whatever their native language is, and then let's add English to it because of the benefits moving forward. I see Paulette looking at me. I know this is something that we talked earlier in one of our meetings about that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Simon.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all.
I think I'm learning something about reading. I think I told you I graduated from high school, and I felt I didn't know how to read. So I took this course in rapid reading and comprehension, and they said, you're reading too slow. Your brain works at a different speed than your eyes. So you got to get those things working.
Gotta
Anyways,
get them in sync.
yeah.
Right.
So
well, you're doing fine now. So whatever you did, it worked.
Yeah, I sped up my reading ability. I was up to like 1,600 words a minute at one time. So,
Wow.
Wow. What was John JFK 900 and some odd? So you're well on your way.
Yeah, but that wasn't. I wasn't reading law books.
That's true.
Reader's Digest. They had us reading anyway. So, thank you very much. We do have a place on the events for people to contact you directly, or you could just email any one of us, and we'll connect you with the people you want to get connected. So our next speaker is Khrystyna Orobets from M&P. She's manager of Indigenous services. She's works out of Calgary. She's got a bachelor's in business administration and master's degree in public administration and has 9 years experience working with Indigenous communities, which she'll probably be talking about. And she's got a number of clients across Canada, including Little Red River Board of Education, the Siksika Nation, Kitaskidau Tribal Council, Maskwakis Education Schools Commission, and Assembly First Nations and Yukon First Nation Education Directorate. Many of these organizations you're all familiar with. So I'll just turn it over to Khrystyna at this time.
Thank you for the introduction, Simon. I'm just curious, is there just 15 people that are able to watch the event, or is it being also available through?
It's going to be, we're taping it, and so what we did we did it last year too, but this is going to be quicker. We're taping it, and those that wanted to be here with you and can't be can watch it in a couple of days. So we'll be promoting it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and it's a pleasure as usual, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to first of all for educators to connect with each other and just learn the best practices, and also just maybe like unlike the provincial school system that has various layers and third level organizations and lots of administrative support, I find that many of our clients, which are education directors, superintendents in First Nations, don't have that opportunity. And so that's why MNP and myself are very pleased to be part of this. So, and thank you for recording and having people access the presentation moving forward. So, so my presentation is on regional education agreements. And before I start, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction about MNP, what we do. So many of you know us as a team of accountants and audit professionals. So we do have a really large team that is specializing in Indigenous services. And we have over 125 offices across Canada. And 300 of our professionals are focusing, like me, exclusively on serving Indigenous communities. We are actively working right now with 250 Indigenous communities and over 800 clients across Canada. So this is very much so a focus of ours. And I believe that we are the biggest professional service provider to Indigenous communities in Canada. So our MNP Indigenous education service line, and that's the area that I'm leading, and I've been working exclusively with Indigenous communities in the area of education for the past 6 years. And our services, my team is a multidisciplinary team that includes accountants, includes researchers, policy professional, and educator. So we do have a kind of broad base across Canada, even though I'm located in Calgary. So a lot of things we do are sort of around the consulting. So we do focus on governance and administrative aspect and capacity building in that area for our clients. And so our kind of core services are around policy support, planning, about organizational reviews, feasibility studies. So typical management consulting services, just focusing on Indigenous education. However, lately, since education transformation started, we've been heavily involved with a number of clients, upwards 10 or 12, just on the regional education agreement services. And so basically what we've been helping with is helping them understand what regional education agreements are all about, helping them develop the needs assessment and the rationale for improved funding, and assisting with that entire process. So this presentation is about sharing our experience to date and just sharing some of the recent developments that we have been seeing. And some of you may have seen me present on regional education agreements before. So this presentation will focus on the things that are new and that kind of have been occurring over the past year. So the agenda for my presentation looks like this, and I'll just have a very brief overview of regional education agreements. We will talk a little bit about the REA governance models, and then we'll spend the majority of the time talking about the REA budget asks. So, and that has been a hot topic lately, and there is again some glimpse of hopes when it comes to submitting those, and there is now a process that ESC has established. We also will be talking about some basics around regional education agreement. I'll allow some time for the Q&A, and then we also wanted to mention our current project with the Assembly of First Nations around inclusive education costing. And kind of the idea here is to get participants from this call, as well as those that may be watching at a later date, because again, the better is our data and the more engagement we get, the better is the outcome of the project. So just starting with the regional education agreement, as many of you know, the education transformation itself started in 2019. However, preceding that introduction of the new funding formula was the AFN policy paper, which really described the two phases that ESC was going to implement. And the first phase was around funding parity with provincial school boards. The second was this regional education agreement idea, and that was going beyond the provincial parity and providing funding that meets the needs of First Nations. So the goal was to have, so that's why you kind of see the models, the current models called interim funding models, because they were never intended to be permanent, and First Nations were meant to negotiate funding agreements that sort of go beyond that model. And unfortunately, I mean, after this got approved, this co-developed approach started to be implemented, like that rhetoric that we've heard from ESC has changed. So over the past few years, since 2019, there was a lot of kind of shift in focus as to what regional education agreements are all about. And so as ESC was telling to First Nations across Canada that the REA is a governance tool as opposed to the tool to get the funding improvements in place. Further, I mean, they were talking about the fact that there is no money budgeted for REAs. So there is that technical table money to kind of assess your needs and propose, but there is no money to actually meet those needs. So that was another narrative. And then the mandate was provincial comparability, and it still is. However, over the past few months, we've seen that ESC has developed a mechanism to submit those budget asks. And there are now the clients that do have the REAs in place were asked to submit those budget asks. And ESC was assisting with some of that process. And again, we are also seeing the change in rhetoric from key ESC officials, including the Assistant Deputy Minister, David Peckham, who was touring First Nations and kind of traveling across the provinces this summer, and was talking about ESC wanting to find out the true cost of delivery of First Nations education services and shifting focus from provincial comparability to needs. So that, again, very encouraging to see this rhetoric, because we used to not. And it was kind of, that's why we didn't have, even though we're supporting so many clients in REA negotiations, we didn't see a lot of success. So there were good discussions, but then when it came to headquarters, it was met with, you know, that sort of blank standard response that, you know, it's not within provincial comparability, so sorry, we can't provide the extra funding. So if you look at just examples of REAs, the ones that I wanted to bring your attention to is this First Nations Education Council, a regional education agreement that you might have seen if you're following the news around the REAs. This is a huge achievement, right? And this REA was in making even pre-education transformation. So it started a long time ago. And those discussions at a very senior level, so with ministers, started a long time ago. And First Nations Education Council is also representing 22 First Nations in Quebec. So the scale of it is pretty large. They were, because Quebec formula was proxy based, a lot of the application was based not on actual First Nations data, but on proxies. That formula that got negotiated as part of the REA is very different. And it is a custom built funding formula. So again, this is sort of this first very promising REA process where there's actual funding attached. So a client of mine, for example, Kitaskino Tribal Council, Education Authority as well, that REA is more focused on governance and the nations, 5 nations coming together and utilizing economies of scale, as well as that collective capacity and wisdom to deliver better services. So it was more about governance. There's also funding attached to develop the system, because again, they were taking over provincial schools at the time, and there was some capacity development funding attached to it, but the provincial comparability formula sort of remained in place, and they're now working through that budget ask process to get more funding. So again, there is not too many REAs across the country, but there is for sure some hope that we're seeing in how ESK officials are framing it, and some of these examples that are somewhat promising. So the remainder of my presentation will sort of be structured around this, like a summary of to-dos. So when preparing to REAs, what do you need to do? So first off, you have to understand what governance model suits your community best, because regardless of the REA format and whether or not you decide to call it a regional education agreement, it may be called any other way. So it's not a fixed term. It's just something that ESK is using in their conversations with First Nations, but by all means, it can be changed. That name can be changed. So as I said, governance. The second piece is the funding enhancements, and that's where First Nations are really interested in seeing, and that's what, you know, a lot of interest comes in when we talk to our clients. It's around really building that rationale for funding improvements. And also really important is because, again, this is a Treasury board process, and it inevitably has to be tied, like any funding ask has to be tied to the outcome measures and targets. And last but not least, I'll just very briefly provide some tips around the actual legal agreement and how, like, what is the best way to review it and what to look for. So the governance model, so the REA, there are 2 distinct governance options. One is to have REA negotiated as individual First Nation. In this case, First Nations Chief and Council remains to be responsible for education. So it's sort of a status quo for many of our clients. So it's not supposed, the REA in that case is not supposed to contradict the existing contribution agreement that nation has with the government of Canada, but there is no separate education authority. So that is again something that many of our First Nations clients choose to do. There's this other number 2 option, which is about creating that education authority that's independent from chief and council. And that education authority can have different responsibilities and powers. So it can be only responsible for a subset of education services. So some 2nd level services or 3rd level services like curriculum development, specialist services, so administrative aspect of operation. So it does vary depending on kind of the existing political environment within that client or that First Nation. And then that second 2B option is when it's sort of an aggregate, right? When education authority is taking control over full scope of operation as opposed to just certain services. And that includes overseeing the schools as well. So for the key components of the REA, there's the 4 standard ones. However, so if you're picking option number 1, so the education agreement is signed by the chief and council, by the nation, basically, only number 1 and number 3 would apply. So basically you need that same agreement again, and making sure that it's well cross-referenced with existing contribution agreement. And then you also have as an attachment the form of funding, as well as your outcomes. It's way simpler. However, if you decide to go the education authority route and you want the funding to flow directly to the education authority, that's when you need that delegation agreement from the chief, and basically saying the chief and council delegates the responsibility for education to this newly established legal entity. So kind of the most interesting part of the presentation, I mean, a lot of time is around the budget, REA budget ask process and what that entails. So many of our clients are reluctant to, quite frankly, enter that REA process. And what they're saying is, okay, what are the other ways to improve funding before the REA is negotiated, or if we don't want to get the REA in place. So there are basically 2 ways: the technical table and the regional education agreement. So technical table, though, is very limited in scopes. We're still talking about that provincial comparability and applying formulas properly. So we're not, ISC is willing to talk about adaptations, which means using First Nations actual data as opposed to, again, the proxy information or the averages. However, you can't really change the provincial formula. You can add to it. As for regional education agreement, you can really, that's where where they allow that room for those enhancements that are beyond provincial comparability. So this is just taken directly from this budget ask template that ISC just developed and circulated to the nations that have the REA in place, right? So the clients of ours that have REAs in place were provided with this Excel spreadsheet, which basically says that just key things to remember in this ask is really about addressing the cost drivers that are either unique to First Nations or that have a good potential to address the outcome gap. And ISC also commits with this process to assess First Nations in the First Nations that have the REA ESC basically says that they are agreeing to provide support in developing that budget ask. So there is a back and forth kind of process where they would provide comments, they would give you advice on how to strengthen the submission itself and where there's more detail required. So again, it's a bit more collaborative, that process, compared to what we've been seeing to date. So again, something that we haven't experienced for the past few years, but now it looks like finally what First Nations have been asking for is slowly getting in place. So this is just a snapshot of one of multiple tabs of that big regional education budget ask template. And it basically, what it captures is information as to the area that you're at, where you're asking for additional funding, and it has to be aligned with the formula one way or the other. There is also, you have to provide rationale for how much you're asking, provide a detailed budget. You'll then have to justify each budget line item that goes on top of your current funding. So again, this is just a snapshot to give you a flavor of it, but this is the type of spreadsheet, and in addition to supporting documents that you have to sort of populate prior to submission. So as you develop a budget ask, just sort of our tips from experience that we had to date, you have to have a good understanding of your current formula, because what ESC wants is for you to prove why the current funding is not enough. And all of their comments that kind of came back to our clients, they were asking why they have to justify why the funding is not sufficient. So really understanding your side-by-side, your current funding, as well as expenditures that are funded through the proposal-driven funding. That's another important thing. You have to, it's kind of providing that fulsome picture. So it's not only capturing what you spend using your formula dollars, it's also capturing your expenditures that are currently being funded through things like Jordan's Principle and Education Partnership Program. So then once you have a good snapshot of this is what my current funding is, and this is what I'm spending it on, next step is to identify and analyze those needs that are beyond provincial comparability. So for each category, like for example, governance, you'll have to collect input from educators, leadership, community regarding the unmet needs. So figure out the what. Then in kind of developing your rationale as to why you need that extra funding, you have to, what our recommendation has been is to leverage best practices, and that's what we do typically in our engagements, leverage precedents where that funding has been provided elsewhere in the country, leveraging any government reports, commitments, tiers, truth and reconciliation, report recommendations. So all of those kind of feed into that, building that well-rounded rationale, which again, as understanding that Treasury Board process and knowing that it's a Treasury Board analyst's job to basically nitpick and criticize any submission that comes in. You kind of have to understand that they are looking at the data. The better rationale, the more quantitative evidence you can provide, the better are your chances to get what you're asking for. So again, using hard evidence, using your achievements, using your education statistics, using any reports you have, again, it depends really on area that you're advocating for, but yeah, the more credible data sources or nation-based data sources you could use, the better your chances. So in terms of cost collection, so once you kind of figure out, well, okay, these are what my needs are, or the needs of the education system are, the next step is to collect information on how much it will actually cost. So, I mean, the key sources, there's, I mean, no rocket science about it. There's own experience and documentation. So things like salary grids, budgets, invoices that you have, because in many cases, you know what it would cost you better. Even if you don't have that specialist yet, you know how much it would cost you to hire one. Contractor estimates and quotes. So contact, if, for example, you're doing the reading program and you want to purchase Lexia from Greenfield Learning, you have to get a quote from them to know how much that would cost. As well, if you're looking at an infrastructure project, get a quote from a few places to say how much it would cost to, for example, bring in those buses or purchase that equipment, whatever that is that your need is. Again, this is a good proof of that estimate being accurate. Secondary research, again, relying on any costing reports done by the government. AFN has been heavily involved in costing studies lately, so I'll show you how you can use a bit later the results of their transportation report to develop transportation request. So there are multiple resources that you can use that are published online that help you out, that can help you out with that submission. And then the primary research. So sometimes you've heard about, you know, this wonderful Cree immersion program, and you would like to replicate that in your community. Again, we encourage, and we do it for some of our clients, just connecting with those First Nations education authorities with those really promising great practices to get that information firsthand. So areas that are commonly included in the budget asks, and that just from our experience, so there is funding to address the outcome gaps. Again, there should be recognition, and provincial comparability formula does not recognize that there is outcome gap and that First Nations kids need more to achieve that same outcome. There's funding to address learning loss, and that has been very prominent lately. Many First Nations were identifying that their kids are even more behind. So let alone there has been this ongoing outcome gap. Now it has become, it widened basically, and the needs are greater. So the operations and maintenance funding, transportation, we were hearing a lot about the need for remoteness and isolation adjustments. The need to develop curriculum. Inclusive education seems like a big gap with the provincial formulas, because First Nations have more students that require those individualized supports, and then language and culture and infrastructure. And again, infrastructure is something that has not been talked about before. When in any of ISK's statements, they kind of asked First Nations to leave infrastructure alone to the side. And again, first, that's not how our clients see it. So lately, ISK has been actually encouraging to include infrastructure requests as well with those budget asks. So just kind of knowing what those gaps are, I'm just gonna walk you through a few examples of developing budget asks for infrastructure for various areas, starting with infrastructure. So again, and that can, like the infrastructure ask can include various components, and the things that we often hear are bus purchases, because none of the formulas address that component. There's new school facilities a request. So if there's a need identified, through feasibility study, through your FNIP, First Nation Infrastructure Investment Plan, around new facilities, but the process has been slow. We include that ask as well, just to create that holistic package. Also, the school repairs, again, many of the administrators can would agree with the fact that the backlog for operations and maintenance projects are huge, and what you have in your acres reports typically, all of those maintenance deficiencies are not addressed on time. So again, this is a place to include them. T-charges, so for First Nations that are remote and need teacher housing, this is the place where they voice, like through that form, they voice their needs around T-charges, because again, there hasn't been a process for approving additional teacher housing. There are standards to kind of maintain that one house per 17 student ratio, but it rarely has been met. And so again, our clients we are working with have been including T-charges in their asks as well. Cultural facilities and other education infrastructure was also there. So the supporting documentation, so again, anything that is produced by ISC is a good starting point. So acres reports, the FNIP, as I mentioned, so that is a good starting point to say, like all the inventory, the entire inventory that's related to education, we need that funded. AFN studies, so there is AFN O&M study that has been done, which you can leverage for some background information as you create the rationale and justification for the ask. Yeah, third-party assessment reports, feasibility studies, work plans. So anything that, again, is quantifiable and uses credible sources, or where you asked a third party to develop something, like that is great material to include in your submission. So for transportation, again, wanted to draw your attention to these sources that you have available. So MNP worked with AFN last year to develop a national study on First Nations transportation. And so there is a report and a cost model that were developed as part of that study. And so the report is a great tool that provides the rationale piece and explains all the reasons why First Nations cannot be funded like provincial school jurisdictions in the area of transportation. So that is a great document for you to describe why the funding is insufficient and what are the reasons or the specific cost drivers that need to be addressed by ISC. And then there is a cost model that you can use to populate your costs. So, and estimate that budget, ideal state future budget. And that model, again, is available in Excel. I can provide that to you. AFN can provide that to you. And it really is a great tool, because the only things you need with that model, the only input parameters is where you're located, basically the name of the nation, and also the number of bus routes, as well as the total number of kilometers driven. So basically, again, with very few inputs, like you can generate a good cost estimate for what your budget ask should be. And basically your ask then becomes whatever model generates, so the ideal future state funding minus what you currently get. And that will be, that difference would represent your budget ask in that area. So again, for language and culture, that's another example where, again, many of our clients really feel like the current language and culture funding is insufficient. So the key kind of cost component when you think about that budget for language and culture are obviously around program administration, language instruction, so having teachers, your language and culture teachers, land-based instructors, renting facilities in some cases. So if you're using an off-site camp facility or a nation-owned facility for things like culture weeks or camps, there's curriculum development piece, which is huge, and that's where, again, contractors could assist you. I mean, there is a model for in-house development, but for smaller nations, we recommend that, the Learning Bird people, for example, are contacted to get the estimate and how much it would cost to develop certain curriculum components. So professional development, again, a big piece. So again, if you have professional language speakers, what does it take to train them to be effective in the classroom? Then there is resource development. So again, for the language instruction to be holistic, you have to have resources to rely on, and that ranges from having dictionary and apps to maps and elder videos. Like there is a host, and it is a hugely expensive undertaking to get this one right. But again, then you have something that you can leverage from generation to generation, and that knowledge is not being lost. Community engagement and things like elders in residence program are another pieces that we often hear from our clients. So when it comes to, again, so these were just certain examples. Your ask may include whatever you wanted to include, both from operational standpoint and infrastructure standpoint. And regardless of what you put in there, for it to be successful, it has to be focused on outcomes. So it has to demonstrate clearly the linkage that extra budget would give you in improving the outcome. So ISC is asking our clients to provide estimates on how they will improve their attendance, their dropouts, their graduation, and improve just overall student achievements test score. So all of that, again, that's something that they're looking for. And they do say that they will be holding First Nations accountable to achieve these. So however, I mean, the submission isn't possible if you don't have that component. So that outcome indication as to, okay, spending money on language and culture will improve the language retention. And if you can provide a quantitative estimate as to what that improvement would be, that would be great. But again, we caution our clients not to provide overly optimistic estimates, just because things take time. So, and it's just plain and simple. So for legal education agreement, again, I've spoken about it before, so I won't be talking about it too much this time, but this is the structure. It sort of remained the same since the agreement kind of was first introduced, and that template is available. So ask your regional office people to provide the REA template and then review it in detail. So in terms of like what to look for in your legal agreement, so it's commitments by the parties. So again, right now, the agreement is very unbalanced. It is reflective of ISC's interest, and there are a lot of commitments that the nation has and very few that ISC has. So making sure that you're very specific as to what your interests are, what there are, and there is a balance between those. And again, their goal is to get that reporting improved. Their goal is to know what your outcomes are. So like you can kind of clearly see why they want that, but in return, there have to be some promises on their end, and there have to be some commitments in terms of providing that greater funding, or at least having structured conversations around how you get there. How do you, what are the specific steps that they will take to achieve your vision and meet your First Nations needs? So the bottom line, we advise that our clients engage lawyers as they review those regional education agreements, and not just at the end of the process. They have to be engaged throughout the agreement, because again, you will see it, and it's an iterative process, that there will be comments that ISK representatives and headquarters will make, and you will question what is the intent of it and why that small wording change makes a difference to them. So having a good set of eyes and having an expert advising you on the legal agreement is for sure a great thing to have, and I would highly encourage to do that early on. So last but not least, just because we get asked that question all the time, is what I have the treaty. What is the relationship between REAs and my treaty, and REAs aren't treaty based? So REAs do not, like, there are clauses in the REAs that sort of say that they're not preventing you or to exercise your treaties there. So it is looked as an administrative tool, more so. So there, again, and many people are still kind of taking it with a grain of salt, which I do fully understand. But yeah, but sort of it is up to you to make sure that that proper language that protects your rights is in the agreement. So again, kind of back to my previous point, there is some language in the template. However, I would highly recommend that you review it with a lawyer just to make sure that you're not deprived of any rights that you currently have. So the Q&A, so we do have 5 minutes left. So I'm wondering if there are any questions.
So Khrystyna, I put the link to last year's, your presentation from last year.
Yep.
If people want to get that information that was provided last year, because you're building on last year's presentation. Yep. And I also included your contact
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon.
So are there any questions? You talked about a survey that you're doing.
Yeah, so I wanted to just briefly mention about just this, and it's a bit off topic of the RA, but actually is related. So similar to how we did the transportation study, we were asked, I mean, we were successful through the RFP process in us getting this inclusive education costing project. So, and this costing project is about, it's kind of twofold. The intent is twofold. It's sort of to inform the redevelopment of existing high-cost special education program. And there has been a review done already. So this part focuses on costs, because again, as you negotiate your REA, or as ISK redevelops this program, it is important for them to understand what are the different cost elements that go into providing inclusive education, special education services. So again, this project is meant to develop that cost-based model that any First Nations would be able to use. And then a summary of the assumptions and the data sources. So again, this is more quantitative focused, and it is really about collecting how much the different components of inclusive education services cost. So
Simon, Michael Stark has a question.
Michael?
Oh, Miigwech, Ani, and thank you, Ms. Orobets, for your presentation. A lot of things to digest and consider. Appreciate that. I'm Director of Education in Wikwemkong unceded territory, and we're working with the First Nations with Schools Collective. There's 7 communities working together on this process, and so I can relate to a lot of what you said. I think coming out of this presentation, I'm encouraged that other jurisdictions are having traction on infrastructure. I know in our initial technical table meetings with ISK, they would say, well, that's not in ISK education, so we're working on them bringing those different departments into the call, so that we don't have to keep going through go-betweens. So I think one of our strategies is bringing multiple ISK departments to the conversation, if that's what it takes. The second thing we're trying that may be unique is that our technical tables include not just ISK, but also CERNAC, Indigenous Crown Relations. And so I don't know if we're going to be able to do both processes parallel, both the education funding formula and governance, but we're finding that there is potential traction to working with all 3 at the table. And then when I saw that where you talked about not disconnecting from the Indian Act or the Education Act, but I know there's many people working on many projects that are taking chunks out of the tree. Hopefully, there's a gentleman, Patrick Lowen, Chiefs of Ontario, who's working with principals and directors to try to disassociate First Nations schools with the term private schools. Right now, we're at their mercy to go through annual or biannual inspections just to be able to grant diplomas, which is egregious. We're not a private school. So anyways, I guess some reflections, and again, our ideal goal would be to negotiate something on infrastructure such as the Mi'kmaq Nation does, but I'll be curious to see if there's traction through any of these negotiations. Miigwech.
I will let you know. I'm curious because we've, even with this budget ask process that happened over the summer, we have been a part of a few submissions. So we're watching. And even today, we got a request from us to clarify and few elements of that submission. So, I mean, yeah, I'm more than happy to stay connected, whether or not you're our clients. I'm happy to answer emails and just chat basically on what your experience has been, and just share what our experience kind of has broadly been with First Nations we're serving.
Miigwech.
Khrystyna, are you also looking for people to participate?
Yeah. So this hasn't been out yet, but just so you know, you will be getting a request to participate at a minimum in an online survey related to high cost special education, and it will be quantitative. So, I mean, if your preference is an interview, that's another venue, like that's another tool we're using, is interviews with First Nations education authorities and communities, so primarily education directors, and for larger First Nations that have a specialized inclusive education coordinator, we would talk to them as well. So the idea is to collect as much data as possible to really understand those regional differences in cost, to have this holistic picture, so it's not piecemeal anymore, where it's proposal driven, and depending on your capacity, you're sort of, you're able to just include certain things. It is supposed to be holistic, and I'm super excited about this because, again, we hear over and over again that high cost special education is a huge issue, and because the funding has been effectively frozen for the past 4 or 5 years at that same level, like that is a huge need. So yeah, stay tuned. We will use you, Simon, to distribute the invites if possible to participate.
Yeah, my pleasure. So thank you very much. As usual, it's you're well informed because you're in the mix of it. And thanks to M&P for being our Wolf sponsor. I don't know, some of you are probably Wolf Clan, and Wolf Clan is sometimes seen as younger people that are running around in packs trying to find things out and explore things around the world. And we just want to thank you for your ongoing support. Arthur Lin has his contact information also in the in chat. So I welcome everybody tomorrow. We're starting at 9:50, and we got a full lineup of interesting speakers tomorrow. So we encourage everybody to zoom in, and we've got a keynote speaker from Yukon First Nation, Stace Bernard, who wrote this wonderful book on raising children in a traditional way, and a young artist from the Yukon that is going to art college this year. Beautiful artwork. And we got Germaine, is it Conarcher? Conacher. Okay, I'm glad you're here. I keep mispronouncing. Anyways, excuse me.
I'm actually, I know why, because I said that I'm Khrystyna. Khrystyna is my real.
but that's a year ago, and I still, anyways, it's stuck in my head. So Germaine is going to talk about the work that M&P does tomorrow. And we've got Conrad Prince talking about the anti-racism, anti-oppression work that he does. Christopher Weinsott, who's been with us all day, is going to talk about establishing well-being through traditional teachings from Listugush. Melanie Bennett, who's also one of our on our board, and she's going to be talking about establishing a board of education, and I think she's one of your clients. And Jacob is going to be talking about supporting First Nations literacy through storybooks, and then we'll close. So my brain is just full of great thoughts today. So miigwech to everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. So have a good evening.
Thanks.
Miigwech.